The way we use our military impacts poor people, not just here in the United States, but around the world. I'm going to start with my own story. I was born in a little town in Mississippi on October 4th, 1965. The house I lived in was a 3-room house with no indoor plumbing. About 10 of us lived in that house at one time, and we lived right next door to my great-grandfather and great-grandmother. My great-grandfather served in World War I, the war to end all wars, as we're told it was. We heard earlier that 38 million people died in that war, but we forget that 65 million people died in World War II. And that every day, people are dying in wars around the world. A majority of the people impacted by these wars are poor people. I want to go back to some words that were spoken by President Dwight Eisenhower. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist until the latest of our world conflicts. The United States had no armaments industry. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. And not only do we use these weapons that we create, we sell more weapons than any nation in the history of the world. All of the wars that are occurring around the world, most of them are using weapons built right here in the good old USA. And we don't even think about it. Over 14 million people are facing famine in Yemen. Bombs are being dropped every day. And we as Americans, we sit at home because we are the most ill-informed people in the world. Our media, which is supposed to inform us about things that are going on in our country and around the world, I call our media weapons of mass distraction. We have about 1.3 million people serving on active duty, and almost 200,000 of those are currently overseas. They are deployed at 800 military bases in 77 different countries around the world. A short time ago, when we lost some service members in Niger and Central Africa, Americans were quite surprised. We were shocked that some of our service members were fighting in this country in Central Africa, not knowing that under the Obama administration, we opened up a new campaign to set up military bases throughout the continent of Africa. In 2016, before 45 became president, the U.S. spent $610 billion on its military. That's half of the money spent on the military on the entire planet Earth. Why? We do it because rich people want to maintain their status as rich people, and they use poor people to maintain that status. Dr. King is famous for being a fighter for nonviolence. And he gave a speech about the Vietnam War a year before he was assassinated. He said this: As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I've tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they ask, and rightfully so, what about Vietnam? They ask if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent. War is insane. It solves no problems. It never has. It never will. We look at the nation of Iraq prior to our invasion in 2003. It was the most prosperous country in the Middle East. The most modern school system, the most modern water facilities in the world. It was a prosperous nation. We bombed it into oblivion. and then turned around and spent billions of our taxpayers' dollars to rebuild what we had destroyed. This is what we do consistently. Tear it down, build it up. But where do these tax dollars come from? They come from poor people. When Ronald Reagan became president in 1980, he decided he wanted a 600-ship Navy. He decided to bring back the USS Missouri, the USS Iowa, and the USS Wisconsin, recommissioning all three of those ships at a cost of $400 million for each. I was part of the recommissioning crew for the US Missouri in 1986. At the same time he was spending $400 million to bring this ship back into service, he was making drastic cuts to social programs to help the poor. 45, because I refuse to say his name publicly, he has cut corporate taxes, but it's not his fault. You can't do it without Congress. We blame the president. We need to blame Congress. They sign off on it. We wear our little stickers and say, I voted. That's just the beginning of your duty as a citizen. What your most important duty is to pay attention to what those people you elected do after they get in office. And you know why they do X, Y, and Z instead of A, B, and C? Because we do not pay attention. Because if we were to pay attention, we'd recognize the harm done to all of these young men and women who are serving our military over a long period of time, who've given their lives. But what we don't pay attention to is that our U.S. military has consistently mistreated its own people. Take the time, take the effort to do it not just for you, but to do it for your children and your grandchildren and all of those children that will come after them. If we don't do it, no one else will. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.